As a society, have we allowed our kids to become digitally dependent on their devices? According to my friends over at the Pew Research Center, they report that a significant number of American children, especially teenagers, spend more time on their digital devices than recommended. While several studies vary in degree, it is generally estimated that the average American teen spends about 4 hours a day glued to the screen of their digital devices, while others have estimated that nearly half of all American teens spend more than 8 hours a day on screen time. Meanwhile, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they report that a staggering number of parents, 71%, are concerned about the amount of time their teenagers are spending addicted to their screens. If you're a parent or a teenager alike concerned about this very issue and want some tangible solutions, then my friends, you're in luck, because this conversation is ideally for you. Because you see, I had the pleasure and privilege of having an extensive conversation with my friend, Mary Catherine Liscinski. She is a certified life coach who is certified to treat digital addiction. She is in the process of writing a book on digital addiction and how too much screen time damages us in many different ways, and she goes through the steps needed to reverse this alarming trend. She's particularly focused on helping children find a more palatable solution to diversify their lives and become less dependent on digital devices, and to ensure they maximize their fullest potential as people, with technology acting as an aid in support of that mission rather than the complete chicken and caboodle. And Liscinski joined me this week to tell me more on how we can all do our part to make sure our kids and ourselves are raised in a society free of digital addiction. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Catherine, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm super excited to learn how you help children and others with their digital detox and making sure that they find the appropriate balance. My friend, great to see you, and thanks so very much for being here.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I've been looking forward to this. And yes, my passion is to help young people and families with this really difficult issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mary Catherine, I wanted to start by simply asking you, how big of an issue do you think digital dependency is today for today's youth and young people, my friend? My friend, what are your thoughts there?
I think it is a very big issue, Kevin. Last year, Politico magazine published an article. It was a survey of licensed mental health counselors like myself, and they asked them, what do they think is the cause of the steep rise in children and teenagers having depression and anxiety? And so 1,400 of these professionals were surveyed, and their number one answer for what the cause is, by far, was social media. And so these are the professionals working directly with young people who are suffering, and they're identifying the cause as social media. So it is big, Kevin. It's big.
Yeah, and absolutely. Mary Catherine, I'm also curious to ask you about the evolution of social media and our over dependence on it, because you can't go too far without seeing a young person on the digital devices today, my friend. So tell me about how big of a dependency you think social media has become, and how do we get kids to put down their digital devices and really engage in authentic conversation? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I have two thoughts there, Kevin. Number one is that Facebook came out in 2007. There were a couple of social media sites before that, but they didn't make it big, okay? MySpace, it kind of came and went. Facebook came and stayed, and so that was in 2007. And then in 2010, the smartphone came out with the front-facing camera for taking selfies, which that became a huge thing on social media, no matter what the platform, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, that really fueled that. And I'll tell you a sad story here about how big of a problem it is. There was a recent news article about a family in Texas, and there was a mother, and she decided to turn off the Wi-Fi in her home. And when she did that, her 3 teenage daughters came after her with a kitchen knife. They were that attached. It was horrific. So thankfully the grandmother was there and intervened, but I don't think the mother had any idea that her 3 daughters were that dependent on Wi-Fi, social media, that they would take a knife to her. And that is just horrible.
Yeah, and a lot of parents today seem to use social media and digital devices as an instant babysitter. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on the role you think parents need to play in engaging their kids so they're not so digitally dependent on their devices, my friend.
Well, Kevin, it does start with the parents. Unfortunately, it's very true that digital devices are an easy babysitter to keep that kid quiet for quite a while during dinner time or whenever. So it's easy, but unfortunately, it's really not healthy at all. And so especially, the younger the kids, the parents are in charge of the digital devices and frankly, all other items in the home. So the digital devices need to be treated like other items in the home that the parents can say, you know what, this item is not appropriate for you. We're not going to use this item in this way. And so for parents who have really young children, I say keep them away, keep them off all devices for as long as possible, delay as long as possible. Okay, and then it's a different story if your child already has a device. It's a little bit different, but keep it away as long as possible when they're young, because it's so damaging to their brains, to their relationships, to their ability to learn. There's just so many things, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mary Catherine, tell me from your experience, what's the right balance to strike in giving your kids digital screen time versus having them do other activities? So what's the right balance to strike, in your opinion, my friend?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that I understand that parents may want their child or teenager to have a phone for safety purposes when they're at a friend's house. They want to be able to contact them or their child to be able to call them. And so thank goodness now there are companies that are making phones specifically designed for teenagers and children that do not have the hardware required to connect to the internet. So you can have what we would call a dumb phone, right? That your child or teenager can have to be able to call you and you can call them for safety purposes and convenience, but again, not have that internet connected. So that's a good development. And then also I would say as far as just time spent, I don't personally focus as much on, how much time is enough versus how much time is too much. I just focus on, hey, a normal childhood, that we would consider normal not that many years ago, is actually critical for child and teenage development. And so we have to be focusing on the other activities, being outside, spending face-to-face time with friends, and those types of activities that are so much better for children and teenagers and all of us, rather than being on a screen.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mary Catherine, I'm also curious to get your thoughts here. There was a Pew Research study that found last year that 71% of U.S. parents with children under the age of 12 were concerned with how much time their kids spent on social media. So I'm curious how much of the work that you do is sort of changing the behavior of parents of making sure that they know the value of social media and digital devices versus everything else life has to offer, my friend.
Well, for me, I would say, children, minors under the age of 18, just keeping them away from social media altogether. Their brains, Kevin, are not developed enough to be able to handle the online social media world and talking to strangers. The same thing goes with video games. Now that you have video games connected to the internet and children and teenagers can talk to strangers online, that's very dangerous. And parents need to know, hey, this is a relatively new thing, okay? Having the internet in your pocket. And we are now just catching up to the fact that, hey, it's not appropriate for young, for those who are young. It's too much for them to handle.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on the roles that school administrators and teachers play in making sure that their students get enough screen time to really get the benefits of everything the internet and the devices have to offer versus authentic learning experiences. So what do you think is the role of the educator or the education community in this discussion? I'm curious to get your thoughts there.
Well, two things about that, Kevin. Number one, many school administrators are waking up to this fact that the cell phones in the school is a big problem. So at this point, over 20 states have said that there should be no phones in school. If they bring a phone to school, they have to put it in a special pouch and then get it at the end of the day. And so they're realizing how having a phone during school time is not good. However, when you were speaking of the educational part of having internet access and computers at school, that was very much pushed in the somewhat recent past. However, there has been a big turn against that as far as what are the educational benefits of having computers and iPads in schools. Because listen to this, Kevin. Out in Silicon Valley, where you have all of these technology companies, the social media companies, many of the CEOs of those companies send their children to schools that have no screens in the school. Not only no personal devices, but also no computers for their children. One example is the Waldorf schools. Waldorf schools are a particular brand of private school, and they do not use screens. If you go to those schools' website, they have pictures of children playing outside. They have pictures of them doing hands-on activities. There are no pictures of children with screens. And as a matter of fact, they have a school social media and screen policy that they put up. And so these, the smartest people in the tech world, the CEOs who know exactly what screens are all about, they're saying, my children are not going to have access to screens, even educationally. In the schools, there aren't any. So, Kevin, we have to wake up.
And to your previous point, I'm wondering your thoughts on the roles that these tech companies have to play in not monitoring, but making sure that they market appropriately to make sure that kids aren't saturated with screen time. So what do you think is the role of these tech companies as well?
I think that the technology companies have a lot of responsibility here. They have already come out to admit that they hired psychologists to make their products addictive. Okay, so the psychologists taught them about addictive properties, and then they built those properties into their social media platforms, into their video games. And so that, addictive properties are going to capture anyone of any age. And so I do hold them responsible for that, to say, hey, you know what? You're marketing things to children that are addictive, that are going to keep them, keep their face on the screen. And now that we've discovered so much about how negative and dangerous that is, I think they have a level of responsibility. And I tell you, Kevin, it's tricky when you get into, what to do about that. How should the government be involved or not? That's a tricky question depending on how a person sees things politically. But what I do know is that each individual and each parent can take responsibility for their own life to say, okay, here's how I'm going to interact with screens so that I don't get sucked in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mary Catherine, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on research that was published last year from the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction. And it found that 31% of American adults say that they're online almost constantly, and more than 85% of Americans go online daily and say that they have some level of addiction to the internet, my friends. So I'm curious, when you hear those statistics, my friend, what immediately comes to mind for you?
Well, Kevin, technology is here to stay. How we interact with it is up to us. But that just proves that, hey, even as adults who have a much more mature brain are struggling with this. It is hard to tear ourselves away, whether it is the scroll of social media or the excitement of a video game. It is difficult. And so whether a person calls it addiction or overuse, I don't really care. But I think all of us would raise our hands to say overuse, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So, right. And so figuring out how to say, how to set limits for yourself as an adult and how to bring back more of what is healthy into your life is a key.
Yeah.
And I don't, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish. Go ahead.
What I was going to say is, I know that many individuals and many parents have given up. They say, I tried to limit screen time in my home. We tried to do this and that, and it just caused a lot of fighting, and we gave up. And that just makes me sad. And that's the main reason why I went into coaching for this, is to say, don't give up. We look at other addictions, whether any kind of substance addiction, alcohol addiction, and almost all of those people conquered their addiction with help, right? It's very rare that you find someone who was addicted to cocaine and stopped all by themselves. Most of them went to some kind of professional, some kind of support group, changed their lifestyle a lot, and then, they were able to conquer it, but not by themselves. And so people, when people wake up to how addictive screens are, they can say, you know what, it's okay to reach out for help. I'm struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend, the center also found that teens spend more than 8 hours a day addicted or glued to their screen, my friend. And I'm sure that that's not a huge surprise to you. But I'm curious about your thoughts on hearing about spending almost a fourth of our days online when we're teenagers, my friend, and how dangerous that could be if we don't reverse the trend.
Right. Well, when you talk about dangers, we have dangers when it comes to mental health. We have dangers when it comes to physical development. We have dangers when it comes to academic performance. But really also the danger is the strangers that they're talking to on there. Children and teenagers don't have the wisdom that they need to have to talk to strangers. And so many families have been ripped apart and just totally turned upside down by their child or teenager being influenced by strangers, or, God forbid, being kidnapped by a stranger, but they connect first online. And then, they think they're talking to someone their own age, another 16-year-old, but it turns out it's an adult, and they get kidnapped and they're gone. And so there are truly dangers out there, which is why parents have to step up and say, we're not going to allow this level of risk in our home.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought something on that I wanted to dive into, and that was about mental health in addition to digital devices, my friend, because, mental health and the social pressures that teenagers see online contribute to a lot of why teens spend a majority of the day online, my friend. So I'm wondering if we can dive into the mental health aspect of this and why it's so important to shed light on that very issue. What are your thoughts there?
Well, yes. Once teenagers are online on those social media apps, sleep, which affects the rest of their functioning hours as well. But so the fear of missing out, but also the constant bullying that can start on there. It used to be, before social media, bullying happened at school, and then when a child went home, they would have a reprieve. They would have a safe place where they were accepted and loved. But now they go home and their device is still with them, and they're still getting bullied, and they can't get away from it, which again, anxiety, depression, self-harm, and even suicide are really on the rise. And for young people, and we definitely connect that to social media, and it is just wrapping them up in anxiety. Yes, so when children spend too much time on a screen, one thing they're missing is the face-to-face conversations with friends, but also especially with adults. And I'll tell you what, Kevin, the human brain does not fully develop until around age 25 or 26. Which means that our outside environment really impacts how our brain literally grows or doesn't grow, or how it gets shaped and connected or not. And so what a child spends their time doing is very important. And so those face-to-face interactions help the brain to grow. I'll show you something. So children, and therefore, definitely all of us, we need emotional intelligence, right? We need to be able to have relationship skills. We need executive functioning skills. So let me show you this, and I'll explain a little bit. This is a drawing of a cross-section of a human brain. And this section right here is the limbic system. This is where a lot of your emotions are housed, okay? So anger, anxiety, fear, things like that. If you have one of those emotions going, this part of your brain is lit up, okay? This part of your brain is your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is right behind your forehead right here. This part of your brain is responsible for the higher level thinking, the decision-making, problem-solving, communicating, self-control, having patience, things like that, okay? So, but this is the last part of the brain to develop, like until age 26, right? This is still growing. And so you want your child to be in environments that help this part of the brain to grow and develop. There are neurons, brain cells, that connect different parts of the brain, because different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. And so you want your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part of your brain, to be connected to all of these other parts. And that is, again, still occurring and still growing until age 26. So that is, one way to explain how, we want this decision-making part of the brain, this rational thinking part, to be in charge of your emotions, right? We want to be able to regulate our emotions, to be able to calm ourselves, to be able to not lash out in anger, either verbally or physically. We want to control this part of our brains. We want to be able to calm anxiety or to calm fears. And so again, that takes this part of the brain being well developed, which takes face-to-face interactions, being with adults, having conversations, that kind of learning from other humans is very critical. And if a child or a teenager is stuck in front of a screen 8 hours a day, they're missing out on that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also curious to get your thoughts on, the video game portion of this, because a lot of teams also spend their time and their social connection through video games. In fact, it says that over 60 million people across the globe, according to the Technology and Addiction Center, again, are addicted to video games, my friend. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that development and why you think people are using technology as a social comfort as well. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so video games also have addictive properties built into them. And unfortunately, video games and social media give you that false sense of connection, right? You are, quote unquote, talking to friends or talking to strangers, but you're missing the face-to-face in person. So yes, video games are just, can be very destructive. I'll tell you one thing that video games does. I'll tell you two things. First, video games can actually create ADHD symptoms within a person. And so then a child or teenager or college student is going to have a hard time sitting and listening to a teacher because the video game trains your brain to pay attention to multiple things at once. It's scanning the screen to look for changes, movement, noises. And so you're training your brain to be hypervigilant. And so then when you go into a classroom, again, whether you're in elementary school or college, or maybe you're in a board meeting at work, you have a lot of trouble focusing on one person talking because you see this movement and that noise. And so, again, video games affecting our ability to learn is a big issue, but then also video games definitely desensitizing us to violence is very, bad news for us as individuals and as a society. We're seeing violence on the rise in certain ways. And so children and teenagers just getting used to the idea of, okay, if I have a conflict with someone, I just shoot them and kill them. That is not the answer. But on the video game, it is the answer. And so doing that hours and hours a day and being desensitized to killing people is bad news.
Yeah, and when we look at the statistics also tell us that more than 40% of American teens today, between the ages of 18 and 22, are addicted to social media, and more than 80% of the Gen Z population, they admit that they take less than 5 minutes to check their phone when they get a notification. So I'm curious, we talk about reversing the trends of addiction. I'm curious about your top three areas of counsel for parents and teens who are concerned about the amount of time that they're reliant on their digital devices, and what are the top three ways we can help them reverse that trend?
Well, I would say one, I'm glad that people are becoming more aware that these devices are addictive. So that's good. But number two, as part of that conversation, we need to say we can change this trend. Too many people have just, oh, it's normal, it's here to stay, we can't do anything about it. But we need to start talking about we can do something about it. And I think when individuals and families and parents start talking together, they will realize, hey, there are a lot of us who feel this way. Let's do this together. Let's spend time face-to-face in person without our devices, and let's put limits on our kids' screen time and do this together, because we need to shift not just individually, but as a culture together. Because right now the culture is everybody's on a screen. So the culture needs to change to, hey, you know what? Technology is staying here as a tool, but we need to get away from the addictiveness of it, the addictive properties, and handle it in the right way. So people need to band together and just start talking about, hey, what can we do together? And that's where I can come in as a coach as well. So another thing I would say would be just to, you can start small by saying no screens, no electronics at the dinner table when we're eating. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, no screens at the table, right? We're going to have family conversation. We're going to have conversations with friends. And so that is a starting point. If it's kind of, that is a struggle in your house, I would say number one, no screens at the table. And so that's another thing. It's kind of hard to pick out like a top three. I should have that right at the tip of my tongue. I would say also, talking to your schools to say, can we not have so much work on the computer? These whole things of bringing the iPad home from school to do homework supposedly, and then what they're actually doing is playing games on that school-provided iPad. I think that's not great, of course. And then, parents do have to say, okay, can I think back to my childhood? Because if you're a parent and you are 30 years old or older, you can remember a childhood without screens. And so saying, how do I bring that back for my child? The things that I used to enjoy, how can I translate that for my child? And to say, we have to get back to that. It's not just normal, it's critical.
Yeah, and another, before I ask you about the book you're working on, another question I had for you is the accessibility to alternative conversations. And what I mean by that is a lot of times teens and young adults use social media and their digital devices as a filler for the time that they have to make up in their day, the dead time where they're not being fulfilled emotionally or psychologically. So I'm curious to ask you about how we can create, alternative ways of engagement that make us less reliant on our social media devices. What would you say there?
Well, two ideas here. Number one, sit down as a family and do what I call brainstorming, right? Just come up with a list of reading. I know that some children and teenagers don't like to read, but I think sometimes if you just find the right book or the right story, they'll get interested. And so reading would be an idea. Various types of puzzles. Spending time outdoors is huge for emotion regulation and just having our nervous systems be calm. So spending time outside. And then also, frankly, you can just Google and say, list of favorite activities for 14-year-old boys or list of favorite activities for 10-year-old girls. And you'll find a list of 50 things and say, hey, let's sit down and look at these 50 things and see what we're going to try. Make it a family project to say, we're going to just try new things until we find the things that we like. And so I would say number one, brainstorm yourself, but number two, you can use Google to find those lists.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you and I both know that if you're addicted to something, it'll take some time to sort of wean yourself off of it. So I want to go back to something you said earlier about taking it at smaller intervals or chunks of, action and activities. So if someone wants to really sort of rededicate themselves to their other interests in life outside of their digital devices, outside of weaning them off slowly or taking more frequent breaks. I'm curious, how do you think people can reconnect with themselves absent their digital devices?
So I would say, we do need to be able to just tolerate being ourselves and being by ourselves in at least small increments of time. Unfortunately, some people, when they are still and quiet, they almost start to get anxious because they're so used to having stimulation from a screen or having their device, ding ding when they get a notification. And so I think that reconnecting with being outside, reconnecting with friends, and spending time some time all by yourself, just letting your brain process, right? We are too much in a hurry. We are involved in too many things for the most part. And so it's good to slow down. You know, that old saying, slow down and smell the roses? That has a lot of truth to it. And so I remember my grandmother saying that quite frequently, and we have lost that in our very fast-paced, get ahead, do everything. Okay.
Yeah, no, I was just curious to ask you about the book you're working on, because I know it talks a lot about the trends of reversing the sort of habits that we're addicted to, my friend. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about the book and why you think it will serve as an ally in this conversation, my friend.
I'll tell you what, Kevin, I am writing a book. It should be out this fall sometime. I don't have a date, but sometime this fall my book will come out. And so I'll tell you how it came about that I decided to write a book. When I first got certified to treat digital addiction, honestly, I was a little bit disappointed in the training that I received because it really, focused a lot on awareness of the problem, and here are the details of how screens damage our brains and damage our relationships, and it spent very little amount of time on what you might call a digital detox, or you just need to stop spending time on screens. And so I began to self-educate myself more after becoming certified, and the books that I read that were about digital addiction and screen addiction were mostly the same way. They just came to the conclusion of stop spending so much time on screens. And so I started thinking, okay, we've really got into the details of how screens damage us in so many ways. Can I research myself on how to reverse these damages in the brain? And so I read and I read and I read and I researched, and I came up with my own answers to this problem. And so my book, yes, the first half of it does talk about the problems, but the second half talks about here are the paths to reversing the damage to your brain, to your relationships, to your mental health, those types of things. And so my book really focuses on the reversal, or what people actually need to do in practical ways, rather than just saying stop spending so much time on screens.
Absolutely. Mary Catherine, as we end our time together today, I'm curious to get your sort of nexus or a connection to this work, and how important it is for you personally to help kids find a different path away from their digital devices. And how do you think it'll contribute to your legacy, my friend?
Well, Kevin, I've been a licensed mental health counselor for almost 14 years, and a lot of those years were spent working with children and teenagers, and I began to have a desire to work more with families as a whole, instead of working with the individual teenager and then sometimes bringing the family in, which is typically what would happen. And so as I began to look more at what would family therapy look like, I realized how much conflict and fighting there is in families just about screen use. And so I said, if I can really focus in on this one issue, this could help families in a big way. And so then I got certified, and I'm also now a life coach, which allows me to coach parents nationwide. And so my desire to help entire families is what started this, but I would also coach individual adults who are addicted. I would also do that as well, but I just have a passion for families, Kevin, and I hope that my legacy is that families can be successful and they can have good, close, healthy relationships. And if I can be a part of that for families, I would just love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you sparked me to ask this one follow-up. Mary Catherine, I put you in front of 100 concerned parents who tell you that I've tried everything to get my kids to engage and get off their social media devices or their phones, but I'm at my wit's end and I don't know what else to try, and I want my kid to be well educated and versed in a wide variety of other things. What sort of advice would you give them to start their conversation with their kid to develop other interests in life, my friend? How would you teach that course, my friend?
Well, there's two things, Kevin. Number one, I would say to the parents, good for you for initially trying, recognizing the problem and trying to reduce screen time in your home. But when parents have tried and failed, I would say, okay, I think most of the time when there's failure, the failure is in the preparation stage, okay? And so, like you've said before, if these teenagers are on the screen 6 or 8 hours a day, that's a lot of time that they need to spend doing something else. And so the preparation phase before trying to limit screen time is, okay, what are you going to do with those extra 6 or 8 hours that you have? And that can honestly take a lot of preparation, which is where I can come in as a coach and really help with the preparation phase, and then I can help a family as long as they need help. But secondly, as far as talking with children and teenagers, I would go back to educating them about brain health and about how brains develop, and telling them, your brain is not fully done developing until you're 26. And so if they have, goals or any aspirations, or saying, we want you to be able to succeed academically and relationally, and that takes a healthy brain, and here are the components that help you to develop a healthy brain, and here are the things like screens that don't. I think that trying to phrase it in a positive light of brain development and helping your kid to be sharp, I think every kid wants to be sharp. Even if a kid isn't necessarily academically inclined, I think they want to be sharp and to be able to succeed in life in some way. And if we tap into that motivation instead of just focusing on, we're taking away your screen, which is all negative to the kid, I think that helps a lot as far as the perspective and the reaction that children and teenagers could have, is to try to get them excited about brain health.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mary Catherine, I want to know if people want to get connected with you, my friend. What's the best way they can do that?
Well, Kevin, there's two ways. There's the old-fashioned way of calling me up on the telephone. So I'm gonna give you the other number. It's 501-290-7132. So if a person has questions and wants to know more about how I might be able to help, just give me a call. Or you can go to my website, which is lifewalkcoaching.com. So walk is W-A-L-K. So lifewalkcoaching.com. You can find more information about me there. That's how people can get in touch with me.
Fabulous. Well, Mary Catherine, I have to tell you, I think you're doing outstanding work in giving the next generation and their parents an outlet of both conversation and a result when it comes to sort of helping them shape a new identity, which is more balanced, that keeps their digital devices at bay when they need them, and readily available when they serve a purpose, my friend. So I want to commend you for the great work that you're doing, and I want to thank you for joining me in conversation this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Well, Kevin, it has been a pleasure. I have loved speaking with you and sharing with your audience. This has been so wonderful.